Hello viewers and welcome. This is the first in a series of webcasts produced by Spinal Cord Injuries Australia on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. I am the President of Spinal Cord Injuries Australia and I'd like to introduce our guests. And here we have all the way from Western Australia, Chris Sontag, a participant in the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and our Policy and Advocacy Officer from Spinal Cord Injuries Australia, Tony Jones. Welcome to you both. Tony, can you tell us what the National Disability Insurance Scheme actually is, and what does it mean, especially for people with spinal cord injury?
It's a social insurance model. It's national and it's universal, which is completely different to the old model of disability service provision and what the Productivity Commission called dysfunctional, fragmented and crisis-driven. The new system is to replace that. The beauty of that is it doesn't matter where you live, what state, or how you have your injury. It's based on need, and it will replace a state-based program offering things like personal care, but also beyond personal care. It's things like equipment, home, vehicle modifications, based on reasonable and necessary supports attributable to goals and aspirations, with the aim to increase social and economic participation.
Tony, how's the scheme funded and how's it different from how it was funded before?
What is generally the case at the moment, apart from the trial sites, is funds are state-based, and depending on what state you live in, the types of supports you get are completely different, and it also depends on how you have your injury. So some areas are better provided for than others, whereas this will change. It moves to a national framework, and unlike the old model, which was block funding means that funding went directly to service providers, and the person with disability had very little say in how that funding was used. This turns that on its head, and funding is linked with the individual, and it's the individual, the participant, that has the choice, control and flexibility, and they drive the types of supports that they want in their life. So that's the paradigm shift.
So who's eligible and what are the eligibility criteria?
You need to be under the age of 65. You need to have a disability with a functional impairment, a significant functional impairment attributable to physical, neurological,
sensory?
Sensory is included, as is psychiatric, cognitive, yeah.
And it's got to be permanent, hasn't it?
It's got to be, yes.
And is there any age limit?
Yeah, you need to be under the age of 65 to be able to get into the scheme. They've put that figure in to, I think, keep costs at a reasonable level.
So, any idea of usage of the scheme so far and what's projected?
At the moment, we're in trial phase, and that's in all states. By the end of the trial phase ends in July 2016. By that time, we're only talking about 30,000 members. just to put that in perspective, when the full scheme starts up from July 2016 onwards, and that will go for roughly 3 years to July 2019, that number will increase vastly from 30,000 to the estimate is 450,000. So that's a significant increase over that 3-year period. And the amount of money that will be going into the scheme is thought to be about $22 billion per year.
So can you tell me anything about information and linkages and what actually is capacity building?
Another part of the NDIS is called the ILC, or Information Linkages and Capacity Building. The old term for it was Tier 2. And what that involves is information linkages, referrals. Another big part of it is local area coordination. You'll have people in communities located in their community with the whole aim being to connect people with disability up to local services. And that is for people who will be eligible for the scheme, but also for the significant amount of people with disability who won't be eligible.
So capacity building is about enhancing people's lives in ways that it...
Capacity building is equipping people with disability to make them a little bit more independent, so that they can actually go out and do things themselves, link up with community-based supports, so that they are more involved in the community socially and also economically.
Can you just give us an example of how that might work in real life?
Well, Chris in a moment is going to talk about his experience in the NDIS, and one example of capacity building for Chris would be the exercise program that he's able to use as part of his NDIS funding.
Thank you very much, Tony, for your contribution. And I'd just like to sum up and say the sorts of things that Tony drew to our attention were just the general principles of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, that it's a program based on need, and it is individually focused, and rather than money and funding going to a service provider, it goes to the individual for that person to manage his or her own funds and how he or she chooses to live their life. And finally, we looked at some of the eligibility criteria with a particular focus on younger people with disabilities, and those over 65, unfortunately, are not eligible.